Greetings once again, and welcome back to the second half of the lecture on Christianity's global influence in the world. And we'll be getting started. Let me share the screen. We'll pick up where we left off last time. And here we go. All right, last time we left off on this slide, seeing how Christianity has grown in the Southern Hemisphere globally now, where it was stronger in Europe in the early 1900s. Now we're going to move to the US and specifically talk about the US for a while. And then at the very end, we'll go back globally just for a minute to compare some statistics between US and Africa and the rest of the world. So the largest religions in the US are trade here. Of course, Christianity is the largest by far, 76.1%. And then after that, you have the non-religious, the 15% here. And then all your others fall into here. And you can see they're quite small. For example, Islam, which is larger in other parts of the world, but is 0.5%. So really the main things, and that's why we'll be discussing them in this course, is you got Christianity, but you also have a growing secular part of the population, this non-religious or secular. And again, like we said earlier, that yes, it includes atheists and agnostics, but they're about 5% of the 15%. The rest are secular, either by choice and philosophy, or just they live that way just because they haven't yet figured out about religion and whatever else. They may just be intent on living their life without any religious thought involved. All right, well, if you break down that, even though 76% may be Christian, if you looked at the church attendance, those who go to church about 40%, and the unchurched is 60%. So you can see that just because a person talks about being Christian doesn't necessarily translate into activity with a church. And so that's one of the areas that we have a good many people that say they're Christian, but they're not really involved in church. Here's a Gallup poll that was done when they were talking about how often do you attend religious services. For Mormons, 81% said monthly or more often. Seldom or never was 19%. Then Protestants, just Christians in general, 64% monthly or more, 35% seldom or never. And then you have Muslims, pretty much the same as Christians, Catholic, even less so. And then Jews, they have a lot more that go seldom or never. So it's helpful to see that, there is, being a Christian doesn't always translate into activity, and particularly that of participating in religious services. The interesting statistic of those who attend by marital status, many more married attend than singles. 61% married versus singles of 39% attend church. And you might wonder about, well, why is that? And generally, in a class where we can talk to each other, I would ask you, what do you think the reasons are? The primary reason is that married people also generally are having children, and church is a safe place for children, and it's a place where children learn good things. And so it's not uncommon for married people, especially when they start having children, to think about, oh, well, what will be helpful for raising my kids? And the church should be a safe place. Needless to say, we've seen the problem in the Catholic Church lately of child abuse, sexual abuse, and that's, there are cases of it among Protestants, and certainly that's very sad, and certainly church should be aware of that and take the necessary precautions for that. But that's just an interesting way of saying, a lot of married people are interested in practicing their religion in a church setting. Here in Christianity, here's the attendance growth percentage of Protestant churches. If you were just to say how are these churches in the U.S., these Protestant churches in the U.S. growing, and established churches have been around a while. They're not growing very much, and but new churches are being planted, and that's where we're seeing a lot of them going around, coming up in areas where there haven't been churches before, but it's not keeping up with the total population here of the U.S. And so that decline that we talked about a little bit earlier, you can see that in the statistic as well. And so just helpful to realize that one of the things that Christian leaders are working on is how to establish more churches for people to get involved in. 400,000 churches in the U.S. If you were asked, are they growing? Are they declining? What's happening? This one, 60% of those churches are declining. And then if you look over here, some are growing, but at a percentage rate less than the growth of the population. And then over here, 17% are growing above the national population growth. And these are primarily new churches being planted. But it's just to give you a sense of what's going on in Christianity in the U.S. To help us realize that, there is some influences that are keeping people away from the value of Christianity. And, that's really what's undergirded our culture in the U.S. And, there are some problems that come with the lack of that, which we'll be talking about later on. You've got a challenge here. Each American generation since World War II has become less churched. And so let's look at some statistics related to that. And note that here is a one by Pew Research talking about the different generations. And so they've got the chart up here. I put it down here for ease to know what these are talking about. The greatest generally is generation that was born between 1901 and 1927. And there's less and less of those folks around. They're aging, and so. But if you looked at their attendance at religious services, they have pretty high percentage, at least once a week, 51%. Seldom or never, 23%. Don't know, 25%. And a lot of these they would not attend because of just health issues, like my wife's parents. Her father was born just a year after this, so he's just barely getting into silent, but he can't attend church so bad. Same with her mother. And so those have to be taken into consideration. But they generally have, if they're healthy enough, they have a high church attendance. Same with the silent, born between 1920 and 1945. And then the baby boomers, but you see it starts dropping here. So these are the ones born between 1946 and 1964. And and this is the trend I want you to see, is it's generally getting less and less, although with the younger millennials, that should be, most of you will, good many of you could fall in, would fall into this age bracket. You see a slight uptake in church attendance, and even in the seldom category, there is more. There may be, a lot of potential in your generation for, engaging in, seeing the value of what church can be and do, and participating in it to make church more meaningful. It's a way of, as the Bible pictures it, it's a corporate function of Christians together, working within whatever environment it finds itself, which may be a very secular, or as it was in the early church, a non-Christian environment with all kinds of issues and problems and sin and, violence, a lot tougher than our current environment. So, but it's an interesting statistic to keep in mind. Another one, the religious composition of the United States, and they extrapolate out to 2050, 30 years further. But basically, they're pointing out here that your unaffiliated, it continues to increase, and they expected, if it continues at the same rate, that you're going to have a higher percentage of unaffiliated people. And but you notice these other religions, Jews, Buddhists, Muslim, are not increasing much, or declining in the case of Jews. But Christianity, because of this unaffiliated growth, will their view, what they're extrapolating at the current rates, they're saying Christianity will decrease in the U.S. from 78% in 2010 to 66% in 2050. Now, that is a decrease, but it's nothing like what secular hypothesis or thesis or theories had put forward. They had thought way, back in the 1990s, that we should by then be primarily secular, and that's just not happening. But there is a creeping of it. National Study of Youth and Religion by Christian Smith and Melinda Denton. They were talking to youth, and their research found that the religiously disconnected was 34%, and regularly religious 33%, and then periodically religious 33%. And so these would be people that were about in your age group, that university age group, and then maybe on in just after university. This also was by them. They research showed that 15% were committed traditionalists. In other words, they had a specific religious group they worship with and did activities with. Selective adherence, it's interesting that 30% were, they went to this church or that church. They weren't affiliated with a specific religious group necessarily. This one, religiously indifferent, 25% just didn't care religion one way or the other. They did find 15% were spiritually, 15% were spiritually open, and then 5% religiously disconnected, and then 10% just totally irreligious. This would fit very well with what we're finding, that unaffiliated people, around 15%. Religiously, this one here, spiritually open, they're open to talking about spiritual things and even religion and so forth. But there's a lot of folks out there that are just indifferent. They're maybe associated to some degree with the group, but they've kind of fallen off out of active involvement and so forth. So interesting findings from them. Christianity in America, then, here's what we're finding, that among evangelicals, there is a decline overall. And, then you got your mainline churches here falling, and down here mainline, and then Catholic as well. So you see an overall trend is a decrease in involvement. And this total here is a total line of, factor in all of these. But it's just to give you an indicator that there is a challenge in the U.S. Christianity and culture's pressure that's causing people to, buy into more secular thinking, and religions being pushed further out of people's thinking, even though we're still quite a religious country. Religious groups in the U.S. This is kind of just to give you an idea of where we're at. And the Southern Baptists are a very large group. This is based on churches. The grouping of this is based on number of churches. And so Church of Christ, which is what's affiliated, Faulkner's affiliated with Churches of Christ, and they have the fourth largest number of churches in the U.S. in 2000. Now this has decreased, as we'll see later, but as far as the number of members, Church of Christ are 11th in the size of you take all the religious groups in the U.S. And but it's just an indicator that you have a lot of the churches here. And those of you associated with Church of Christ, this is just some information that may be interesting to you. All right, well, Church of Christ, this is showing you that even after 2000, you can see here that number of churches are declining. And this is a trend across the board. And with that comes you see a loss. Here the churches decline, but your membership went up a little bit. But then the membership began declining here on into 2018. And so this has been a trend we've been noting. And since I'm a member of Church of Christ, I keep up with the Church of Christ statistics. But it's also across the board, churches are dealing with this. Mainline, as we noted earlier, the last lecture, they're losing a lot more members quickly. Evangelicals are losing some, but at a slower pace. But it's just to let us know that in the U.S. we are, dealing with things that are pressuring people to not think spiritually as much, and certainly not engage in church as much. So this is just a graph of Church of Christ membership, and so by 2018 we're at 1,115,942 members, and and it is a slight decline from 2012. And so just things that we need to keep in mind and say, what can we do to engage people more with, what's good in Christianity and how it can make a difference. And of course, you're studying that in this course, and in your book, How Christianity Changed the World, is an indicator of how historically Christianity has made things better. And of course, now, whatever age you live in, like the first century Christians, they had to engage the world they lived in, and they were very successful in showing people that, what Christianity had to offer, and it made a big difference in people's lives. And you'll see that in your reading, and we'll be talking about that more as we go through the course. All right. This is a graph of the congregations. You can see that the number of churches, congregations within the Church of Christ has been decreasing through the years, and especially it had a high in 1990 and 1997, but from 1997 has been a decrease, and that tells us something about what we need to do as a religious group, and what we need to think about and emphasize. But on the other hand, if you compare Africa with number of churches and Christians, it continues to grow. This is primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, 1,400,000 of a population of 850 million. These statistics are about 5 years old. We haven't really got any new updated statistics, but there's 14,669 churches, which is more churches than we have in the U.S. So U.S. membership is 1,300,000 at the time of this one, and in 2006 it was 12,963 churches. So we can see that Church of Christ, for example, and this would be true of a number of evangelical groups. Churches are growing in sub-Saharan Africa, number of churches and number of members. And so realize that Christianity grows at different speeds in different parts of the world. But by knowing that, we know that, it helps us understand what's happening. And I've told, because I spent a lot of time in Africa, I've told the African Christians there that, someday they may have to come to the U.S. and evangelize in the U.S. So it gives us a picture of Christianity in a global perspective. And then the final slide for this presentation here is just to give you an idea. This was funded by the Pew Research. They're extrapolating out to 2050. They looked at how statistics have been going these up to this point, and they said, well, if it continues with that same trend, then here's what we can expect by 2050. And so they were looking at different countries like Australia, majority Christians, 67.3%, but the trend is for people not to become unaffiliated or non-religious, and so they expect that by 2050, population will not be majority Christian, with only 47% of the population. Same with you got with the United Kingdom, currently 64.3 of the population is Christian, but they expect it to drop to 45.4 if it continues on this trend. Or you got this is a West Africa country, Benin, 53% Christian, but they expect only 48.5% Christian by 2050. France is an example of same thing. They would say 63, but 44.1% will be, in 2050. It'll be primarily unaffiliated people, and it just goes on through those. So the trend that they're looking at is that a lot of places, especially Western cultures like Netherlands, New Zealand, France, United Kingdom, Australia, all those, Bosnia Herzegovina could be classed in that too. The one exception probably Benin, but it's just pointing to the fact that there is pressure from modern culture, and we'll talk about this later some more, through modernization, secularization, that it's pushing and against religion. And so it's a area that we have to be aware of, because we're all going to go out and work in those things. As you go out in whatever field you'll work in, you're going to be interacting with that type of culture. And that's part of what this course is about. As you're finishing up the capstone course here to finish up your work here at Faulkner University. But as you look towards whatever work you're going to do, whatever profession you're going in, we hope that the Christian ethics that go along with the teaching here, and if you are a Christian, how will you engage the world from your Christian perspective to do that, to make it a better place, to serve people as Christ did. And all of this is, in this particular lecture, just kind of give you an overview of the place of Christianity globally, and in the United States specifically, since most of you will be working in the U.S. And we'll talk more about this. We'll have a whole section on secularization, what it is, whether it causes it, and then we'll have a whole section on engaging it. But there's several other things we've got to cover first. But this lecture completes week 2's lecture. So you only have 2 this week, as opposed to the last week. And so some weeks we'll have more than 2. We may have one other time we have 2 or 3, but in either case, this finishes up, and I encourage you to finish up your assignments and your discussions, and keep up in the class. And I'll see you online. Take care.